Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Michael Oren.
Like that there. Thank you. Woo. What a great kavod. What a great kavod. To you, President Joel, to Chancellor Lamb, to Chairman Kressel, to the Dean's Administration, faculty, to my distinguished fellow honorees this afternoon, to my Mori, Senator Joseph Lieberman, to the families and to the parents, to my family and my parents, especially to my mother who wrote that introduction. Thanks, Mom. And to the extraordinary Yeshiva University graduating class of 2010. Shalom. Now, as you heard, I came to this job about a year ago from about 3 decades of writing history. And as an historian, some of you may find this surprising. I always thought that my major task was decision making. Now, how can you ask that? Why does a historian have to make decisions? What is an historian, a prime minister or something? Now, a historian is not a prime minister, though I can think of some historians who think they'd make good prime ministers. Historians are decision makers because they are confronted with masses of information. And from those masses of information, they must select the most relevant and compelling passages. Now, take, for example, the events of May 13th, 1948, the day before Israel declared its independence. Now, keep in mind, the Zionist leadership had less than 24 hours to prepare for the ceremony, and they had a budget of less than $500. There was a fear that the British, who were still running the country at the time, would come and arrest everybody. And there was a fear that the signing ceremony set for Friday afternoon would take too long and run into Shabbat. There was no agreed text for the declaration. The delegates debated whether it should mention the borders of the future Jewish state, and they debated whether the declaration should even mention the name of God. There was no parchment, nor was there a scribe to write on the parchment. Worse, get this, there was no agreement on what the new state was going to be called. There was no agreement on the name of the state. Now, many delegates thought that the name of the new state should be Zion. But other delegates thought, no, if we're named Zion and it comes to voting in the UN General Assembly as a state that begins with the letter Z, we get to vote last. Now, all this is going on while foreign diplomats were laboring furiously to delay Jewish statehood indefinitely, while hundreds of thousands of Holocaust survivors languished in displaced persons camps in Europe. And all this is going on while 6 Arab armies, lavishly armed with hundreds of tanks and planes and artillery pieces, prepared to descend on a population that was half the size of that of metropolitan Washington, D.C. today, a population armed with little more than handguns. Now, all this was going on while the Zionist leadership itself, fearing the massacre of every last Jew in Eretz Yisrael, debated extensively, painfully, whether or not to even declare the new state's independence. Now, imagine yourselves being an historian in my place and having to choose between all those facts. Which are crucial to your narrative? Which are extraneous? Which of them best tells the story of Israel's extraordinary creation? Now, historians have to make some tough decisions, but ambassadors much less so. Now, again, I know this may come as a surprise to some of you at least, but most of Israel's decisions are made not in Washington, but by the democratically elected government of Israel in Jerusalem. No, as ambassador, my job is much less about making decisions than it is about answering questions. Government ministers in Jerusalem might pick up the phone one day and ask me, how can Israel cope with that disastrous oil spill in the Mexican Gulf? A journalist may call me and ask me if Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is serious in his declarations for peace. Some of the hardest questions, this won't come as a surprise to you, come from anti-Israel activists on American campuses. Typically, I'm asked, how can I, as an American-born Jew, move freely to Israel while an American-born Palestinian cannot? Now, just as historians have to make some hard decisions, so too, I, as ambassadors, give some straight answers. To the government ministers, I reply that yes, Israel can help address the Gulf crisis by supplying to the United States oil-eating algae that are cultivated in Israeli laboratories. We can make available Israel's advanced solar and electric car technology, reducing America's dependence on oil. I answer that journalist by saying that Israel will believe the peace declarations of the Syrian president once he stops sending tens of thousands of rockets to Hezbollah, closes the Hamas headquarters in Damascus, and severs his ties with Iran. And to the anti-Israel activist on campus, I reply that while there are 22 independent Arab states, there is only one very small Jewish state. And it is the right of every Jew in the world to return to our homeland, because that right comes as a corrective to 2,000 years of homelessness, of inquisitions, of expulsions, and of massacres. Our right to return is our affirmative action, righting a monumental historical wrong. And I add, the Palestinians too will have a right to return and settle in their own independent state once they eschew violence and negotiate a permanent peace with us. But as ambassador, there is one question which I must admit I have a great difficulty in answering. It is the question about a decision. Why, people ask me, why did you decide to move to Israel? And where do I begin to answer? Do I begin with my youth growing up under the shadow of the Holocaust, witnessing the extreme tension and ultimate joy of the 1967 Six-Day War? Should I mention volunteering on a kibbutz and participating in the struggle to free Soviet Jewry? Or do I try to explain the extraordinary fortune of growing up at a time in Jewish history when an independent, proud, and vibrant Jewish state exists, that I have the zchut, the privilege, of taking responsibility for that state, responsibility for its shortcomings as well as for its successes. Believe it or not, rarely a week or even a day goes by when I'm not asked that question by non-Jews and Jews alike, and I confess that question leaves me nonplussed. Therefore, it is with great relief and incalculable honor that I address the graduating class of Yeshiva University. For here, among you, I know I will never, ever be asked that question. Here, I know that you know the answer. Intrinsically, intellectually, spiritually, you know the answer. And you have always known the answer. Religious Zionism has always been at the forefront of the epic struggle to recreate Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. More than 100 years ago, religious Zionists were among the pioneering vanguard that forged the first modern Jewish settlements and cities. They fought in the ranks of the Jewish Legion during World War I, and the Hebrew Brigade during the Second World War, in the Haganah, in the Lehi, in the Etzel. Bridging the worlds of Torah and secular studies, religious Zionists created internationally renowned centers of spiritual and scientific learning, from Merkaz Harav to Bar Ilan University. Religious Zionists were there on May 13th, 1948, urging that Israel's independence be declared. And over the course of the next 62 years, religious Zionists helped guide Israel through successive wars and crises. Throughout, those Zionists have been committed to the belief in the Jewish state as Rishit Tzmichat Geulatenu, the first flourishing of our redemption, and dedicated to Israel as a modern democracy in which a wide array of ideas and interests must be reconciled. Whenever difficult decisions had to be made and intrepid answers rendered, religious Zionists were ready. And in America, here, no institution better represents this readiness, this commitment to combining Jewish and secular scholarship, the dedication to preserving Israel and defending its essential relations with the United States. No institution better represents that extraordinary legacy than this institution, Yeshiva University. That legacy was personified by an expansive list of outstanding graduates. One such alumnus was Baruch Rabbinowitz, a native of New Jersey, who traveled to Jerusalem in 1932 to study under Harav Kook, but who also became active in the revisionist Zionist movement, protesting the Nazi oppressions of the Jews. He gained some fame by climbing atop the German consulate in Jerusalem and ripping down the Nazi flag. Later, Rabbinowitz returned to the United States. He earned his smicha from Yeshiva University, and there he also raised funds for the Zionist underground. But it was during World War II that Rabbi Rabbinowitz made his greatest contribution to Zionism. He joined with a group of young Jews from then known as Palestine, a young group of young Jews led by Harav Kook's nephew. Together, they worked to arouse American Jews to the horrors of the Holocaust and to rally them to the cause of Jewish statehood. Against unspeakable odds, and at a time when such ideas and activities were considered utterly revolutionary, Rabbi Rabbinowitz and his colleagues organized congressional petitions. They took out full-page ads in the New York Times. No one had ever done that before. They even produced a pro-Zionist show starring Bob Hope, Zero Mostel, Ethel Merman, with music by Count Basie and the Andrews sisters. This is sort of like Lady Gaga doing this today. Can you imagine? And guess where they staged it? Staged it in Madison Square Garden. The heroism and creativity displayed by Rabbi Rabbinowitz proved pivotal in making America the first nation to recognize the recreated Jewish state. And his example has been replicated by other yeshiva graduates, such as Rabbi Joshua Fass, founder of Nefesh B'Nefesh, that ingenious organization. Thank you for him. Nefesh B'Nefesh, that ingenious organization that has helped facilitate the aliyah of thousands of people in recent years. And Dr. Arthur Edelman, professor at Ben Gurion and Hebrew universities and a pioneer in the field of neonatal care. And of course, there is Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, a source of personal inspiration for me and countless other Israelis, who has so deeply enriched our society with his scholarship and his unflagging efforts for tolerance. Indeed, examine any facet of Israeli life in governance, finance, academia, defense, and you will find yeshiva graduates. And little wonder, every year 600 of you study in Israel under yeshiva's auspices, and 15% of you, all of you receiving degrees today, will make aliyah, enriching and strengthening our state. Others will remain in the United States and further enhance the thriving modern Orthodox community here, a bastion of principled support and unceasing love for Israel. Whether in Israel or here in America, you, yeshiva graduates, will make the decisions and you will provide the answers. Israel today faces decisions and questions every bit as daunting as those it confronted on May 13th, 1948. We face the threat of global and limitlessly financed campaigns to deny Israel the right to defend itself, or even to deny Israel the right to exist. We face the mortal danger of an Iran armed with nuclear weapons, an Iran that threatens to wipe Israel off the map, with many of the long-range missiles it possesses that can reach any Israeli city, an Iran that could convey military nuclear capabilities to Hamas, Hezbollah, and other terrorist organizations, a nuclear Iran that will ignite a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, transforming the entire region into a tinderbox. Finally, and perhaps no less perilously, Israel faces the challenges of peace. Now, peace, of course, is a vision that we all cherish. It is the vision of Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in a situation of permanent and legitimate peace. But, and this is a big but, an inadequately negotiated peace could result in thousands of missiles raining down on our cities, our farms, and our ports, much as they did after Israel's evacuations from Lebanon and from Gaza. An inadequately negotiated peace could permit the Palestinians to persist in claiming territories from Israel and denying recognition to Israel as the Jewish state. Israel is rising to all of these challenges. We are asserting the right to defend ourselves, affirming our right to exist. We are resisting Iran's efforts to acquire nuclear weaponry, cooperating with the United States and with other like-minded nations in imposing sanctions on Iran, all the while keeping all options on the table. And we are pursuing peace, insisting on the effective demilitarization of any future Palestinian state and on the need for any future Palestinian state to recognize Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. We are rising to the challenge. We are not rising to meet that challenge alone. We have never done it alone. We have always done it together with you. With you, we made that historic decision on May 13th, 1948, to declare our statehood. And the following day, when we did, with you, we fought off those invading Arab armies. With you, we built one of the world's most resilient democracies and a thriving Hebrew culture. With you, we absorbed hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees, reforested our landscape, and became a global leader in science and technology. And with you, we made Israel into a flourishing center of Jewish learning, a wellspring of spiritual effervescence. Be with us today, too, reaching out, as you have always done, to other branches of Judaism, reconciling religious and secular studies, and strengthening our commitment to Klal Yisrael, the unity of the Jewish people, and to Chibat Zion, the love of the Jewish homeland. Be with us as we grapple with the complex questions of peacemaking. Be with us if the government of Israel decides to make excruciating sacrifices for peace, or if that government decides that the arrangements offered to us do not justify such excruciating sacrifices. Be with us, for as Arav Soloveitchik said 43 years ago, the decisions that affect the safety and well-being of millions of Israelis can only be made by Israel's elected leaders. Members of the class of 2010, I understand this is no easy time to graduate. There is much uncertainty out there, I understand. But as you set out on your future, know this: the state of Israel will always remain a constant in your lives, a source of pride and inspiration, and we hope someday your home. You now are the decision makers, not just studying history, but you are making history. You now are the ambassadors. The answers from this day forward are yours. Toda rabah, mazal tov.